Hi folks, welcome to another edition of the Ominous Tower. Crank this nice music down. For those of you who may be wondering, that's Prokofiev's Classical Symphony. Nice happy little tune. Kind of a late start to today's podcast. A lot of stuff came up, but I still wanted to get this one done because it's based upon sort of a vision I had last night that I wanted to share with you while it was fresh and the ideas that grew out of it. I'm going to introduce the title before I talk about the artwork on this time. Actually, I wanted to mention that last podcast's episode on my opinions about atheism went over really well with the atheist community, as you may have noticed by all the comments on that episode. I think I haven't had so many comments on anything I've done until then. Largely disgruntled atheists complaining that I completely misrepresented their cult. Basically, I concluded from all of the attack comments I got without any constructive feedback. One guy tried to be somewhat constructive and suggest a debate, and then refused to negotiate on the terms or conditions of the debate. The rules wanted to basically have me come on his channel without any idea what to expect, and face what would have obviously have been an attack. No moderation, which is something you should always have in a debate, so that you have a neutral moderator that makes sure nobody steals the bully pulpit, nobody commits the major faux pas of bad debating tactics. No, the guy even refused. I suggested, to prepare for this, we should at least get to know each other, so I have a chance to understand your brand of atheism, where it comes from, how long you've been an atheist, where you were before that. Were you raised in another? Were you raised in a religion and became atheist? Have you always been atheist? These are important things to know before we carried on a debate. Also get a sense of his personality and so forth, and how we were going to work together. And I offered up, probably he doesn't understand what omnism is very well, having only come to watch a few minutes of my podcast and then attack me. Might behoove him to learn a little bit about my religious beliefs, my experience that led to those beliefs. Well, he absolutely flat out refused and said, no, I can't do that, because if I tell you about the truth, then you'll want to debate me, because you'll realize that I was right and you'll be afraid to debate. Which is the most narcissistically elitist and self-centered thing I've ever heard anybody proclaim about their so-called atheist belief system, which is a non-belief system. Non-beliefs are beliefs, which is another attack vector that they took. Well, it's not a belief system, it's not a religion or a cult, because it's negating that. Well, it's still a belief system. A belief based on negation, a belief in negatives, a belief that disenfranchises other beliefs is still a belief. It's a very strong belief, in fact, a very cultish belief. At any rate, I'm not going to talk about that more, except to encourage you to look at some of those comments, which were quite comical to anybody who's had to deal with any of the nonsense that these woke Numpty Dumpties come up with. And this was clearly a woke political bunch who represented this new idea of basically turning freedom of religion into freedom from religion, and proselytizing it, programming it into our children, because many of these people are in fact teachers or people that have custody of children for some part of the day and are doing things with people's children that they're not telling their parents about, and their parents don't find out until their children start turning on them, which is one of the reasons why I did that whole segment on atheism. I'm tired of this crap going on. At any rate, today's subject came up as a result of, like I said, a vision I had in the wee hours, which is when I often have a semi-waking period of inspiration. And I saw this bust, if you will, of a three-headed god. And the first association that came to me was, looks sort of like what I remember Janus looking like. If you know who Janus is, that is this strange god of Rome that doesn't really fit well with other pantheons of the area. It's kind of like this odd cat out. Not the Zeus, because there's a separate Zeus, leader of the gods, but there's this Janus god that was in fact invoked at the beginning of every other kind of ceremony as kind of an initial blessing, no matter what they were going to do after then. Have a dedication to Jupiter or one of the other the Roman pantheon of gods. They always had an invocation to Janus. So it's a very important central god to Roman culture, but very poorly understood. Again, I saw a three-headed version, and when I went to do the research, I found that, well, the most common representation of Janus is two-headed, although it mentioned that that was not always the case. Now, before we go on, I'll just mention the AI art tool didn't do a very good job again. I asked it to draw the three-headed god Janus, and you can see that of the four pictures that it generated, none of them actually looks like Janus, which has two heads facing out. And if there would have been a third head, it would have been facing forward. But I got two with four heads well, this one's close. If these two heads were combined into one, they are sort of half combined into one. That's sort of what I asked for. And then I got these three-headed ones on the bottom where the heads are facing either more forward or actually facing, which doesn't look like Janus at all. So I'm not sure what this AI was thinking, but it sure doesn't know much about Janus, that's for sure. At any rate, let's look a little bit at what this is all about, because, well, let me tell you what the title is going to be first. Because the second thing I thought of is, I'm going to call this one Janus / Triglev, the Roman Prussian god that Charles Dickens reinvented. Now, what's up with Charles Dickens? Those of you who remember one of Dickens' most famous works is A Christmas Carol. And interesting thing about The Christmas Carol is it is a ghost story. Has three ghosts in it. The ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas past, and the ghost of Christmas future. And that occurred to me as, boy, this makes that three-headed God image that I saw suddenly fit with a lot of other things that have been coming together that I've been talking about recently. Because, well, basically, I believe that Charles Dickens was drawing on this same kind of a thought to get these three ghosts. And this trinity within one being, actually represents how time ties into creation and the Messiah system, the versions of creation that are demarcated by a new space-time being set by experimentation within God's universe, and then, you know, using basically programs instead of fully free-willed souls. So, you know, basically a cast of characters that are totally programmable to do the experiment with, to come up with, okay, this is the cast of characters that we need to make this version of the creation simulation converge onto this particular goal of this particular day of creation, which again ties back to how in the Bible the days of creation are sort of thought of as phases that creation goes through to get to the point of the day 7, which in the Bible is painted as, okay, we're done, God's off to the golf course, but everybody, you know, criticizes that little bit of Genesis because we're clearly not at a perfect place. There's still a lot of problems. If God thought creation was done after 6 days, God was kind of a stupid and lazy God, because things aren't perfect. There's still a lot of evil out there. There's still a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering. And this is one of the chief darts thrown at the Abrahamic religions that, you know, are basically based upon the Genesis account of creation. Okay, so let's look at this idea of past, present, future from a time standpoint. As I told you when we talked about how time really works, space-time emerges not as, okay, we start an experiment at the beginning of the Big Bang, if you will, and run it to the end, like many people would like to think of how time works, but actually time is an emergent phenomenon. Just like space, if you have a Big Bang of space, you would envision it expanding from a point in all directions, although that's rarely how it's drawn in the diagrams that physicists like to talk about the Big Bang in. They have it laid out as, okay, there's this singularity, and then they show what happens as time progresses forward. That's not the way it works. It doesn't make any sense. And this is one of the things that's caused a lot of consternation among physicists trying to come up with an explanation for, okay, it looks like there was something like this Big Bang, but, you know, it's really kind of hard to explain how things emerged from this point and why time seems to work differently than space. This now makes a lot of sense to me, and also gives me a new way of explaining and helping to understand how the Messiah system worked before sex was invented. So, you know, the Messianic stories are always about trinities. Since sex was invented, the trinities are a male and a female coming together, producing a child that is the new God that replaces the old God. That's the Isis, Osiris, Horus story. That's the basis, really, of the Jesus story. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. Pretty much all creation stories, messianic stories, have this Trinity aspect. But before sex leaves the question, okay, what was the Trinity? What pattern was this based on? Now, I've talked a lot about the Gemini pattern. Oops, I gotta take this call from my wife. Just a second. Oh, she hung up. Okay, well, I'm gonna keep on going here, and maybe she'll call back. And I'll pause for a little bit. Okay, so what I realized is that I've been going through, by the way, and redoing my slides to accommodate what I've been learning about time and discovering about how this whole simulation thing worked, and how, I mean, basically, the big tell that I had a few episodes back was that, oh, last year, the Hubble the James Webb Space Telescope gave us new data that makes it look like, well, we thought the universe was 13.8 billion years old, but now it looks like it's twice as old. And if you look at the timing of those dates, you will see that the timing of the last measurement was the mid-80s, and we're about, or actually the late 80s, I think, about 87, and we're about roughly between 32 and 64 years later, that we're now seeing, oh, geez, it's twice as old. And that's the only way we can explain having spiral galaxies that, according to star formation theories, could only have come about if the universe was a certain age. And this is why I've been gravitating to this new idea of time as something that, space-time is something that emerges as a whole thing, as a complete plan, a cast of characters that basically converges on a midpoint. That midpoint has the most important characters that drive the rest of the story. And so rather than playing out the whole simulation with real characters, with real souls that can learn and grow and make their own free will decisions, you only have to replay a piece of it. And I was thinking that piece was 2 generations. A generation that is sort of the Luciferian Messiah and the God Messiah, the Father-Son pattern. And sometimes the Father has the Son, and sometimes the Son has the Father. Is kind of, which one is already there and which one incarnates again. Kind of a tag team pattern, which is the Gemini pattern. But this Janus idea that came to me yesterday said to me, you know what? I think there's a hidden trinity there. And that all of a sudden it dawned on me that this special 3-soul pattern is a 3-generational pattern of not one Messiah, but 3. One that anchors in a certain time, and one that looks to the future, and then one that looks to the past. The anchor one basically is the life that has to happen first, that says, okay, this is the first of the 3 messiahs, the anchor point, the central figure that's missing in the normal Janus drawing, but actually shows up elsewhere. And then the one looking backward, looking this way, I guess this way if you're mirror image there, looking backward is the one that basically explores the past and incarnates backward to basically fill in the details of this story that was planned to have this new midpoint, but which can actually have a different pattern of what happened in the backward direction and what happens in the forward direction. As long as the midpoint conditions are met, that satisfies what the plan was for this generation, this day of creation. Okay? And so with that in mind, the apocalypse that we're in the middle of now, which doesn't necessarily mean something bad, although it does require a nexus of spiritual energy to be generated within the time frame of these three special characters. Now, there are many other special characters that happen within this same time frame, and this particular time frame started about the 1880s and goes basically till the third of this three generations of characters dies. And these three characters are my grandfather, my father, and me. Louis Arthur Tromp, Robert Louis Tromp, and Robert Maris Tromp. And there is great significance in those names. Rob is basically the root of the name that Isaac Asimov gave to robot. And Rob Ott is version 0 of a robot. Basically a programmed AI. And as I've been telling you, we are programmed AIs. That's what a soul is. We have limited free will, but we have to awaken that free will by basically making decisions that are different than what our character did in the plan within God's universe. He planned all this out using fixed programs, non-free-willed souls that he could tweak and reprogram and restart the simulation, whatever was necessary to advance from whatever the previous accepted version of the simulation was. And that's essentially what each day of creation was, is moving towards a new, not a new beginning end, but a new midpoint around which a beginning was established and an end established, which might be different in Lucifer's universe, the testing universe of real souls, free-willed souls, at least free will capable souls, versus the lab environment inside God's universe where the plan was come up with. This is what the goal is. This is the new midpoint. These are the essential characters that have to accomplish very important things within these three generations. And I think most of you will admit that the time between about the 1880s to roughly about now have been absolutely feeling very apocalyptic. The 1880s were about the time that Marxism was invented, that the first major socialist revolutionary efforts started in basically all countries in different forms. In Russia, it led to the Bolshevik Revolution. In Germany, it led to, first the Kaiser's War, World War I, and then to the Nazi War of World War II, which was actually a Nazi slash Bolshevik, Stalinist slash Japan oligarchy war of basically fascist and communist powers trying to establish a new world order, but actually coming to blows with each other, because although Hitler and Stalin started out allies, divvying up Poland, Hitler turned around the next year and instead of invading England decided to invade Russia. And that set up Stalinist Russia to be our allies, which has had some very, very dark and negative consequences since in the Cold War and in the handling of the other more dangerous communist power, the CCP in China, who are absolutely right in the center of the darkness that's going on now. It is their influence programs that are behind all of the communist, anarchist, atheist, woke cult, kind of satanic cult that has taken over our media and is programming our children in very dark dystopian ways and teaching them things behind parents' backs that if the parents knew they were teaching them, they would pull them out of the damn schools. They are teaching him it's okay. You can be any gender you want. You can be a furry if you want. You can create your own identity because you can do anything. Teaching them, basically enabling and encouraging narcissistic fantasies. Now, that's okay for children. All children have narcissistic fantasies, but if a parent or authority figure doesn't rein those in, narcissism grows and expands and becomes more dark and dark and dark until it results in mental illness and severe problems like sociopathy, psychopathy, megalomania, which are all things that we are seeing growing among each successive generation in the last 150 odd years. Exactly this time frame of this 3 generation. Now, how does this work then? What happens is rather than play out the whole of history from beginning to end, the game works where you just play the 3 generations of the anchor character, the anchor messiah, if you will, which is my grandfather, the future messiah, which is my dad. He was a very, very scientific person, not a very spiritual person. He went to church, but it was just because that was something you were supposed to do in his generation. And he never showed much interest in spiritual things. In fact, the only thing I ever heard him tell me that was anything close to spiritual was what his experience was like when he was a witness to the first hydrogen bomb at Eniwetok Atoll. And this was his one and only religious experience, and he didn't tell me much about it except that they told him not to put their heads down and not look, and he accidentally opened his eyes and while the explosion was going, and he could see his bones through his skin. But he did some strange things after that. He came back, married my mom, who they'd already been dating. They were high school sweethearts, and they proceeded to have children. The first was named Peter, the second named Paul, and then they had a stillborn that I'm pretty sure they had planned to name Mary. Because if you remember, the popular folk group at the time, it was big, family-friendly folk music, was Peter, Paul, and Mary. And this is kind of strange because Peter and Paul were like the 2 most famous early Christian proselytizers. Peter was supposedly the rock upon which Christianity would be built, and Paul was basically the figure that actually spread Christianity among the Gentiles, especially throughout Asia Minor. And if you read that, basically did more to create what became Christianity almost than the Gospels. A lot of the notions of the implications of the gospel story were sort of filled in by Paul and expanded upon and made into more of a fleshed out universal world religion. Anyway, this third child that would have been Mary was stillborn. And they had me about a year later, which was kind of odd. It was probably fairly strange to get pregnant so quickly after having a miscarriage like that. And instead of continuing, his naming scheme along the lines of, okay, well, I didn't get the girl I was expecting, I'm going to, use another apostle name, my dad named me after him. And if you've studied my content, you will know that this has some special meaning for me because there's a very, very impactful movie called The Princess Bride that has a very strange story that includes this story of the dread pirate Roberts, which is a huge cultural meme. The guy that started the Silk Road dark web called himself the dread pirate Roberts and painted himself as kind of a Robin Hood figure. And the idea was that you would always have a dread pirate Roberts if your successor you always named Robert. Now, that at the time was like, okay, I see how this may have fooled the adversary, because they were expecting one Messiah, but they actually got two. And my dad fit the pattern, but he didn't achieve the awakening that was expected, and that probably caused the adversary to let up their guard and let me develop and learn and grow without so much temptation and challenge hitting me until the last 5 years. That was my thinking at the time. This vision of last night, this Janus vision, kind of expanded that and said, oh, you know what? I bet the adversary, Lilith, the archdemon Lilith, who is a hermaphrodite, shapeshifter, not female, but loves to manifest as the mother goddess, the love goddess. Oh, I'll take care of you. Just give me your love. I don't like that kind of God that demands service and attention. I don't think gods like that are worthy of worship. They're narcissistic gods. Hang on, I'm going to pause for just a second while I talk to my wife. Okay, sorry for the pause there. My wife is at a friend's birthday party with our son, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. At any rate, where was I? What I realized is that previous days of creation that were based upon, like, for instance, the Isis, Osiris, Horus pattern, which I believe was one of the messianic periods that the Egyptians remembered in their tradition. There have been a number of them, and some were big events and some were small events that moved history in a different direction. The pattern of Alexander the Great and his father Philip and his mother Olympias, who was a pretty strange cat. Definitely a servant of the adversary, sort of a dark sorceress kind of woman that was a very dangerous woman that in fact probably murdered her husband and his new wife and new child to pave the way for Alexander to take over and become the conqueror of Persia that his father had been preparing for. A very interesting story. A lot of these messianic families throughout history, but they have been, the traditional sexed Messiah patterns, where, okay, you identify the parents, and then, okay, I know who the parents are. This one of these children is going to be it. And I believe that's kind of the message that was set up with my family. And the natural inclination would be, okay, the one who's it is going to be my oldest brother, Peter. He had definitely spiritual ambitions, still does. He actually became enamored of Hinduism and named his children after Hindu gods. Well, actually, the boys after Hindu gods, and the girl after Galatea, which is another version of the Gaia goddess, the earth goddess. At any rate, I'm not going to tell you their full story, but he was not the one. He turned out to be a pretty dark character whose family doesn't talk to him anymore and lives a very solitary life because none of the family can really stomach talking to him. I was the last one to talk to him. I tried to maintain contact until I shared my early spiritual awakening with him, and he was very insulting and dismissive and absolutely refused to discuss any of the things I hoped to talk to him about our family's history and his discoveries. This is the one who actually changed his name because he decided he was not a Trump. He changed his name to Trump with a U. This was before Donald became all that famous. And I guess he thought that was pretty clever because then he had, now he looks like a minor celebrity maybe in Louisiana because he's got the same name as the MAGA group's hero. Strange. But he was not the one. My second brother was I guess, somewhat nicer, better person. I actually didn't get along with him as well as my oldest brother because he was basically a bully. My strongest memory of my second brother, Paul, was him deciding that one of the boys in the scout troop we belonged to, which my dad was the scoutmaster, was a sissy, and tying him up to a tree and lighting a fire under him. And I felt really bad about that because I didn't speak up. I was 3.5 years younger than him, and I'd already gotten the crap beaten out of me by my brother once, and I didn't want to have it done again. So I sat by and watched him basically torture this boy who was effeminate, but I doubt that he was actually gay. He was just kind of a mama's boy and kind of a softie. And okay, there are a lot of boys that are raised that way. That doesn't mean they're gay. That doesn't mean they're trans. That doesn't mean that they need to have a sex change. It just means that they are a more sensitive and soft boy, which happens. I was one of those boys. I was not the jock that my older brothers were. I was not the girl chaser, the successful conqueror that my brothers were, and actually got a lot of flack from my dad for that. And always, I guess that kind of drove an inferiority complex I had for a long time of, middle child, I got no attention. My parents didn't really seem to appreciate me or have time for me, and that made life difficult for me. That was one of my early big challenges, and why I ended up getting a degree in physics instead of pursuing the things I was more interested in, like archaeology or history or music, which ended up to be just the right decision, because if I didn't know so much about physics, if I hadn't pursued that career, I would not have had my career in the electronics industry, the oil and gas industry, the insurance industry, semiconductor industry, and and lived in for significant periods of time in Germany and China, and had a very wide exposure to the world that most Americans don't have. So, it's like, I look back on my life and it's almost miraculous on all the steps that I've covered, including about a 20-year stretch of being a spare time and sometimes full-time actor who acted professionally in New York City and taught acting at modeling schools for a number of years. I've hit a lot of ground, and it all seemed to prepare me for this spiritual journey that I've been on since. And I don't think anybody else that had a different background could have put all the pieces together that I have to say, wow, I see a patterns here. I see something going on, and I see that I am somehow intimately tied to that. And I had confirmation of that when, this entity that I think of as the god of the tall grays came to me in an ayahuasca ceremony and telepathically told me you'd been given a great gift, and then proceeded to show me some absolutely incredible things about my past lives, which were mind-boggling. I don't know, maybe past or future lives. I've been a lot of places, I know now. At any rate, I think of these three, I am the god of the past, because I have a much stronger interest in knowing the truth about our past than exploring where we're going in the future. I think my dad is the character that's going to reincarnate forward and be basically the ghost of Christmas future. And I'm going to be the ghost of Christmas past. And my grandpa is the anchor of this midpoint. And I don't know if we're the first bunch of souls that played out this pattern. We're not, by any stretch of the imagination, what you would consider the most important characters in this last 150 years. But it turns out that somehow these three characters were the ones that turned out to be the solution that set this, okay, if I can make these three characters happen and all of the associated characters that they depend on, then this will generate a new space-time. And we have seen evidence that new space-time is coming into shape because the universe is getting bigger. That's the only logical explanation that anybody has put forward for the latest results from the James Webb Space Telescope. That, gosh, there are, we thought the universe was, it's interesting, the earlier estimate before the Hubble telescope was between 7 and 20 billion years. And then when they had a better management, they narrowed it down to, okay, it's about 13.8 billion years. So they basically converged on the center point of the previous high-low estimate. And then, about 32 years later, they had a doubling. I think there's going to be another doubling soon, because that's what's happening, is we are creating this new space-time. And the longer this third in the three messiahs lives, the longer, the more doublings we'll have. They go in powers of 2. So if there was anybody measuring with the equipment to measure the size of the universe when I was just born, it would have been much smaller than it appears to be now, because it would have reflected a progression that was in process. And there were, interestingly enough, events at almost every one of those powers of 2 where I nearly died. I nearly died at age 2 because I fell in the Snake River, and my oldest brother actually got his life-saving merit badge fishing me out before I drowned. I don't know if I had a near-death experience then, but I'm pretty sure I was doused enough to have been thoroughly baptized and probably had some sort of near-death experience. And certainly in my early childhood, I had a lot of paranormal experiences that I discounted. I had out-of-body experiences. I would sit in my bed and I had out-of-body experiences where I could just float anywhere, where I could climb the walls. And it was like, this is weird at the time. And I didn't tell anybody about it because I didn't want anybody to think I was crazy or anything. And, I passed it off as just, wow, that was strange. I'm glad I didn't tell anybody about it. And it stopped about the time I went to college, I think. And I didn't really dredge it up until my spiritual experiences started really happening about 5 years ago. And it's like, man, there really was something going on there. Not everybody has this, I'm discovering. And generally, if you have these kind of experiences when you're a child, it means that you are not a new soul on the block. You are not what I refer to as an NPC soul, a newbie that's on their first conscious incarnation. At any rate, this is what I was thinking about it, and I just want to finish up with looking a little bit at this god Janus and what we know about him. I'm going to pause for just a second and take another call. This is my friend. Okay, sorry, back. Don't normally take calls, but there's a few things going on in the background that I wanted to make sure to take care of. Had a friend here that's in a really tough spot, and I'm trying to get him a few dollars to get a flight out so he can renew his visa before he's illegal, and he's in a tough spot. At any rate, let's look at what it has to say about Janus. So it says, God of all beginnings, gates, transitions, time, choices, duality, doorways, passages, and endings. And that's a pretty wide definition of gods. And beginnings and endings certainly fit with looking back and looking forward. They don't normally draw a center figure, but interestingly enough, there is a god in Northern European, the Prussian area, where basically, if you know anything about that area, it became Germanic after the Teutonic Knights conducted a very bloody crusade against the Lithuanian pagans who were there. And these Lithuanian pagans' chief god was this cat named Triglev, who is depicted as a three-headed god. Now, that's one version of it, or as a totemic three-headed god with looking three directions like that. How interesting. Now, what's especially interesting about this is that no one knows where this religion came from. They don't really see any way to tie it to anything else. And interestingly enough, though, there are three-headed gods showing up in some esoteric Christian sects in the Middle Ages. And nobody really knows where that came from. But basically there was a group. I don't know if it was a very large group, but there were certain people that were depicting the Trinity as a three-headed Christ figure. Three messiahs, which is exactly what I'm talking about. There is Celtic lore about a three-headed deity, but in Celtic lore it is female. And this matches the triple goddess Dana in Celtic parlance, who is basically the root name of Dawn, or the people of Dan, the tribe of Dan. These are all tied together. It is a very, very important Indo-European group. And interestingly enough, this seems to tie to the biblical character Daniel, whose name actually means, part of it means God. El is God. Dani is judge, judge God, which, if it were a female, would be pretty close to how I describe karma. And so I think the female version of Dani is an incarnation of karma and is indigenous to the early Indo-European people that then became the Tuatha De Danann in Celtic mythology, that you're familiar with the Celtic pantheon of Ireland, and related to the other pantheons, even the Hindu pantheon, in fact, has a triple head main god that they have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva as the three characters. Now, they turn Shiva into a destroyer, which is not one of the creative gods, a Masanic god. It's a destructive god. It is a manifestation of the adversary. And this is the darkness that is buried within the Hindu tradition. And this is actually showing up in pretty much all mythological traditions. After they get established, this adversary, this shape-shifting adversary, creeps into the pantheon and starts corrupting the other gods, particularly the father god. And this is where you get basically Yahweh becoming a bad guy because of the influence of his, in the Bible there actually is a wife goddess, Asherah, which is sort of written out in translation, but if you actually do a good translation of the original Proto-Hebrew, there is a mention of a wife of Yahweh. And not a lot is known about that cult, but it was known that yes, she was worshipped, and this is the worship that was looked down on and thought of as being icon worshiping, doing things that were against the Mosaic law, fornicating and unseemly conduct, wild dances, and violent sacrifices. These dark goddesses demanded children's sacrifices. And we didn't really know about this until we discovered the Sumerian tablets. The Enuma Elish mentions Lilith as a really, really major character in their creation story, as major as the dragon Tiamat that was responsible for destroying the first planet, the first Gaia of this system, the planet that used to be where the asteroid belt is, whose remnants are scattered around but also mixed with the planet that used to be the Earth to make the Earth and the Moon. That is a well-known story that is true. It's been proven by people who study the Earth and the Moon and how they could have formed. This absolutely matches a story that was in Sumerian mythology roughly 6,000 years ago, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and probably came from oral stories that go back way further than that. And so, it all ties together with so many threads are coming together of information, discoveries, archaeological and geological discoveries that are showing that the history of our planet is not at all what the scientific establishment decided was the truth. And there is a huge, almost spiritual battle going on right now between people who are open to these investigations. Folks like, this isn't a scientist, but he's a journalist that covers it. Graham Hancock has been under just acid attacks from the archaeological establishment trying to discredit especially the work that he has popularized here in my new home country, Indonesia, about the site Gunung Padang, which if you hadn't heard about, it's been in the news sometimes as potentially being the oldest pyramid complex on Earth, thus yet discovered. And then the counter to that is, oh, no, it's just perfectly natural. You guys are insane, you're stupid. That Indonesian archaeologist is an idiot, knows nothing. And this is coming from assholes that have absolutely no experience in Indonesian archaeology, Indonesian history. The chief attacker is a guy whose specialty is Greece, a very narrow period of Greece. And yet he's leading the charge saying that, oh, everything that, I forget the guy's name, the Indonesian archaeologist has found in a very brief exploration of this site that was shut down because of pressure by these assholes. These people who don't want us to know our past. They want to keep this stupid narrative that civilization only started, roughly 6,000 years ago. And, people were hunter-gatherers with no technology before that, forever and ever. Despite so much evidence that indeed there were civilizations before the end of the last ice age, which ended not with a whimper, but with a bang, with massive cataclysmic events that were either caused by asteroid collisions or maybe, Tunguska type events, a series of asteroids is looking like that hit, kind of in a pattern across a wide spread, starting from around Canada and going all the way to Europe. That's one of the theories, or that it was maybe even some sort of an atomic war. People have talked about it. The layers of soil that are found then have these, there's a layer of like crystallized glass that looks very much like what happens, what you find after a nuclear explosion. It would also be typical of a Tunguska type event that is, for all intents and purposes, much like an explosion, a nuclear explosion. Same kind of effect. When the asteroid breaks up, it causes an explosion, basically because it's heating up so quickly, falling into the Earth's atmosphere, that it can't stay together. And it's basically an airborne explosion that's actually much more devastating than if you had a more compact and coherent asteroid, say a metallic one that just plows into the Earth. These ones that break up can cause a lot more damage. And I'm not going to go into the Tunguska events. If you can look into that. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to start following the work of Randall Carlson, who's one of the chief scientists, investigators, who has been pulling together a lot of this information that is supporting a catastrophic history of our planet. And this is very, very close and important part of the story that I tell spiritually, that this planet was created for a very specific purpose and with very specific alignments of the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, the stars, to basically give clues that would allow humanity to be getting a little bit of help from previous civilizations which had been informed by earlier versions of chosen species. And then in this last phase, since the last ice age, perhaps we have only had a very minimal influence from these extraterrestrial or previous chosen species, extra-dimensional. Yes, there is stuff like that going on, but clearly we don't have spiritual beings living among us throwing thunderbolts around and demanding, to be our gods and basically being the god kings of empires. The stories of ancient civilizations tell of an era like that when the gods themselves were the kings, were the rulers, and sort of treated all of these humans as slaves, as their servants, and apparently had some sort of mind control over them because it was a very peaceful time. There was plenty to eat, yes, so everybody was happy, but it was kind of an enforced happiness. Nobody is that happy unless they are under some kind of Orwellian mind control. And that is, I believe, what the civilization was like in the first version of humanity, what they refer to as the Lemurian civilization, which is the civilization that was centered right near here in Indonesia. And that, I believe, is tied to why they don't want anything to come out about this site at Gunung Padang, because I believe it will prove to be the oldest civilization on the planet. Maybe a very difficult one to dig and discover because this is such a geologically active area. There's earthquakes, very frequent earthquakes, very frequent volcanic eruptions that make it hard to keep sites together. Yet, here's another site I'm going to recommend that you follow. There's a guy named Praveen Mohan, an Indian fellow who has made it his YouTube channel mission to explore Hindu and Buddhist temples and look at the symbology, look at the construction, look at odd factors about them. And he has been lately actually working here in Indonesia and exploring some of the old abandoned Hindu temples that were maybe then converted to Buddhist temples and then abandoned when the Muslims took over, and has found some really, really interesting stuff. I'm not going to steal any of his fire by giving you more than that, but watch his recent stuff that he's been showing about Indonesia. And it's interesting, they've been fairly supportive of letting him explore these sites and so forth, and I think that's been very fortunate because I could see him being shut down just like what is the guy's name? I feel really bad that I've forgotten this archaeologist's name, but the guy who got to explore Gunung Padang, and who would do more work if he could ever get it approved. But after the attack blitz that the detractors made on the Indonesian government, they're afraid to approve any more digging there for fear that they're going to be called out in the media. And this ties into another theme that really shows that we are in apocalyptic times, because we've got this cabal of really dark forces that control our media, that want to define what the truth is, and they don't care if it's true or not. They are going to force their narrative. And this ties in with yesterday's talk on atheism. It ties into my commentary on wokeism, which is a cult. And I believe it is a satanic cult. They don't directly worship Satan, although they now use a lot of satanic iconography in performances. If you have noticed, Taylor Swift now does Satan drag. The satanic performance of Sam Smith at, I don't know if it was the Grammys last year or something like that. I didn't watch the thing, but I saw some of the song and the disgusting, openly satanic symbolism. And this is dark stuff. These are not good people. This is not just good clean fun, folks. This is satanic. And these people hate religion. They hate anybody that has any faith. and this is why I have such a problem with atheism. They hate religion. They are actively trying to redefine freedom of religion as freedom from religion. And they are making every attempt they can to deprogram your children from their traditional religious beliefs and turn them against their parents. And if you know anything about how communism works, how Satanism works, that's exactly what they've been doing for thousands of years. And they are evil. They are bad people. I am sorry. If you feel offended by that, you are evil. Either naively, stupidly, or intentionally, your counterculture is evil. It is destroying human civilization. It is encouraging the massive drop in fertility rates, in birth rates, the massive increase in death rates that's coming from this new spate of cardiovascular disease that we never had before COVID and the vaccines, the new spate of depression and depression-related suicides, the spate of gender disfiguration that basically turns people into eunuchs that are never going to reproduce, voluntary Darwin Award winners. This is not good. This is not freedom. This is not empowering people or giving them freedom to be who they are. This is satanic nonsense. And I will stand to that to my grave. I will defend that position. I don't care who attacks me for it, what anybody does to try to discredit me or deplatform me or whatever. I'll keep talking about this till somebody comes and cuts my throat. I feel that strongly about it. I will be martyred for this cause because I want to save as many souls as possible from beast marking. And that is what these people are doing in serving the adversary. They are turning people against God. They are turning people against karma. They are telling people, oh, you can be anything you want, do anything you want, any narcissistic fantasy, you're free to do. That's your right. That's your freedom. This is nonsense. You cannot take your freedom at someone else's expense. That is evil. You can't exert freedom to manipulate and use and groom and confuse and program others. Now, all education is to some extent programming. Traditional education is at least programming that is tried and true. It has worked to keep societies relatively healthy for thousands of years. This new woke cult has almost completely destroyed our civilization in a matter of decades. If you look at how, especially in America, culture has changed between about the early 90s and today. If you had, say, left the US in the 90s and come back today, which is sort of what I did actually, because my time in Germany was late 80s, early 90s, and my time in China was early 2000s to roughly about 2012. Okay, and believe me, being out of the country and coming back and seeing the changes, there is something really evil and dark going on. Every year they move the yardsticks a little bit more. They boil the frogs, turn up the heat on the frogs a little bit more. Not enough for any of them to really notice they're being boiled, but by God, I look at my little sister who has, she's the one who never left the nest. She still lives in Idaho Falls, the same town we all grew up in, where my parents are buried. And the change in her and her family from, when the kids were young and they were starting their family to now, it's really night and day. My sister works in mental health, and she used to be a very compassionate, kind, helpful person who enjoyed her job. Now she is very dark and dismissive, and actually sounds like she hates her patients. She treats them like children. She has no patience for them, and has no empathy as far as I can see, and certainly had no empathy for me when I was going through the dark nights of the soul that came with my awakening. And we still talk once in a while, but basically she has no more use for me, and I really have no more use for her, because she's gone so far off the deep end, being programmed by this engine that is destroying Americans' minds, especially Americans who basically do what Americans are supposed to do. They watch all the latest series, they watch all the popular movies, they get involved in the Super Bowl and all the popular sports, and they keep up with the latest songs. That's my little sister. And it's not a bad thing. It's like something most Americans do. But they don't realize they are being very darkly programmed in a very subtle and sly way over decades. And when you see that happen to somebody you love, it is really, really, really hard to swallow, because you can't talk to them about it. If you mention something like this, they'll think you're crazy. That's what my sister thinks of me now. She thinks I'm crazy. Maybe you do too. Well, okay, that is your right. But I'm telling you, if that's the way you feel about what I'm sharing with you, I'm not the one who's crazy. It's the people that have been subtly programmed and have had their minds basically destroyed by cultural Marxism. I like to really call it cult Marxism, because that's more what it is. It is a cult of reprogramming truth to be, black becomes white, red becomes orange, good becomes bad. That's a transition we went through, right? Cool becomes hot, hot becomes cool. We've had all of these sort of things happening culturally over the last 100 years, until people don't know what's right, what's up, what's down, what's the latest politically correct way to interact with the world. And it just keeps getting worse. Now we've got this trans nonsense, where we're suddenly supposed to accept biological males pretending to be females, walking into female bathrooms and molesting females, competing in women's sports with a man's body. This is nonsense. This is satanic nonsense. And I defy anybody to justify it with any sane argument. It's not enabling and giving people freedom. It's giving them freedom to be more narcissistic, more delusional, to create fake identities for themselves and then try to put them into practice at the expense of everybody around them. I mean, God, there's been so many stories lately about couples. One of, the man decides suddenly he wants to be a woman, and the wife's supposed to just go along with it. Well, okay, my husband is now a woman. I guess that makes me a lesbian. This is insane. And we are enabling it. We are empowering it, thinking that we are being compassionate, thinking that we are being loving. That's not love. At any rate, I'm kind of drifting off. That's really all I wanted to talk about, is the Janus connection and how it ties into basically another confirmation of what's going on right now, and fleshing out the pattern of the times. And it really is neat how it works, because once God has come up with a workable new version of space-time that has a greater extent, because that's basically the goal of creation, is to build a bigger, better multiverse. So you make it bigger by having more universes with more diversity in them, more different places that souls can play once they figure out what kind of games they like. And you make it better by making sure that the universes that souls play in, they're playing with souls that they actually want to be with. And that's why we incarnate. That's why we get experience in the physical universe, so that karma will know how to map us into an afterlife experience where we'll be welcome, and we will also be accepted and fit in. And that's not something that's easy to do in this physical world, especially in these times. But that's as it should be, because this is that special time where, in a matter of 1880 to now, we have this period that's been played over and over and over again with different souls, experienced souls, by the way, that have had a lot of incarnations, being given a chance to play these main characters, the three messianic characters, but all the ones around them that sort of drive the major events of their life. So, my dad was a nuclear chemist. A major event of his life was getting to participate in, be an observer in that first H-bomb explosion. Getting to spend his career working at the nuclear testing site in Idaho. And before that, at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in California, which incidentally, they moved from California to Idaho the year before I was born, which was a major part of the story. If I'd grown up in California, even for part of my life, like my older brothers did, I doubt I would have turned out anything like the person I am. There are just so many things that have to fall into place, but you don't have to play everything. You just have to play these three generations and all of the characters that are important to that time, till it converges on, okay, this is what those characters did in God's version. Not exactly, but close enough that what wasn't done according to the plan was just brief stints in the individual universe of those main characters. Because I tell you that a soul participates on three planes. This is what the 12D Merkaba is about. 4 dimensions are the physical space-time of incarnation, physical incarnation. 4 dimensions are the spiritual space-times we participate in, the afterlife universes that we go to between physical lives, and 4 dimensions of our God-level experience, which is the experience we develop in our own universe, which includes all of the other experiences integrated, because our universe has our total, this is where our higher self lives actually. Our total experience through all incarnations is in our own universe, which we aren't all that aware of until you get to the God level of consciousness. So we don't really know that we have our own universe. That is our Merkaba, in fact. Every soul is a universe in development. Not the God, like many of these panpsychists think, or oneness cultists think. No, you're not God. You are like God in that you started at a non-player character consciousness who incarnated within the latest version of this system. And the first version started out with only 3 universes. The universe of God, the physical universe of Lucifer, and the first hell universe, if you will, of Lilith. The Matrix afterlife, where the evil God, the evil entity, the adversary, basically milks your spiritual energy by forcing experiences on you that can be anything. They don't obey any rules. They're just whatever the adversary thinks they can torture you with to generate the most energy from you, which, spiritual energy is much more easy to generate through fear, through dark emotions, than through light emotions. And that's what drives apocalypses too. That's why every story of apocalypse has this pattern of, things have got to get really bad, and then that brings an incarnation of God, a Messiah. This is all throughout every tradition. It's not just Christian. It's in Indian lore, it's in Buddhist lore, it's in Celtic lore, it's in the Greek pantheon, it's in the Egyptian pantheon. It's told all throughout the world because it is true. There are variations, there are little pieces of it that are changed to basically promote bloodlines that maybe once were messianic bloodlines but are now just globalist elites. And yes, globalist elites have been around for a long time. There are new families coming into it now because, they've hit it rich as a tech mogul or as a media mogul or this or that. But the old families are still out there. And some of those old families still have members that are not human, that are previous chosen species that may be playing for the adversary. These previous chosen species include the undead. They include vampires, shape-shifting bats, bat therianthropes, if you will, werewolves, wolf therianthropes, zombies, hominid undead, if you will. These are real things. They're not so common anymore. Why? Because these creatures have, some of them at least, have the ability to shapeshift. They can disguise themselves. Vampires are shapeshifters. Werewolves are shapeshifters. There are all sorts of shape-shifting entities that are still living among us. They were leftovers from a previous cycle of creation that have not yet reincarnated under the new rules. And that's why they have more powers than humans have now. Because with each version of creation, souls are basically given more limitations in the physical universe so that they will earn what power they accomplish. They will earn their godhood the hard way by having to deal with being a very, very mortal human. That's why we're the chosen species. It's not because we're the smartest species ever. It's not because we're the most long-lived. It's not because we have the best genetic makeup. No, we're probably the worst chosen species ever from those standpoints. But we are one who has had to suffer the most, who has had to earn what they got. And that turns out to be the most important aspect of turning out good children. This is why the previous chosen species were not the final one. They didn't work. They were narcissistic. They were jerks about using power. They made others suffer. They dominated and controlled others and made them dance to their tune. That's evil. That is the cardinal sin of tyranny. Using and abusing other people because you have power over them is tyranny. Now, you may think you're doing it for their own good, but if they didn't ask you for it, then you are tyrannizing them. And one of the darkest tyrannies is convincing people to join a cult, join a hive mind, thinking that you're doing them a service, thinking, oh, if I join this group or whatever, I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to return to source. This is nonsense. You don't want to return to source. Why? Because source is where non-player characters get generated. You don't get to keep your experience if you get returned to source. You have to start over from square one. The people who are telling you this nonsense oneness stuff about, oh, just join us, and oh, the cult of law of attraction. If you join us, we'll teach you how to dream anything and make it happen. This is dark shit, because they have no concept of karma, of, well, if you force things to happen, you are going to take away freedoms from other souls. If you make the universe give you money, where did that money come from? It came from somebody else. And usually it's come from some poor slobs who have been fed a line of bullshit by a flim-flam scam man selling one of these new age cults. These are not good people. Some of them are well-intentioned. Maybe they do a little bit of good, but anyone tells you that they can show you the way to enlightenment is a liar, because enlightenment is a very individual thing. Each soul is an individual. Some souls are going to find that they get their kicks out of science, or out of art, or out of singing, or growing plants, or whatever. That's the whole point of the plan, is to allow you to become the kind of God that you want to be. And we need gods of everything. This is what the pantheons were about before the Christians basically tried to destroy the idea of everybody getting to be a god. Catholicism actually is a polytheistic religion. They just call these demigods angels and saints. But the saints have certain specialties. Now, the problem is that they make saints out of people who do healing, or people who do things the Catholic Church likes, but they have no use for people that are great artists. There's no Saint Leonardo da Vinci. There's no Saint Einstein. There should be. Those were Messiah souls who did something that was absolutely essential, and no other soul could have done it. They were necessary characters, and every time a soul is assigned to play that character, they are living a Messiah life. If you get to play Einstein at some point in the game, you probably won't be the first Einstein, but you will get a chance to play that same character and see if you did it better with a better karmic score than any other player. And you might actually find some way to play that character that's better than the original. And now you become the Einstein number one, the next better version of Einstein, that somehow creates this required timeline with less pain and suffering, with more new gods created, more messiahs created than were planned. That's how the actual plan, the implemented plan in Lucifer's universe of testing, can actually improve on God's original plan. The only thing God's plan necessitates is that you have to complete this midpoint first and find a Messiah trio that matches the pattern that, okay, I know that this new midpoint is established when these three messianic characters do the following things. And the first one, my grandfather, had a pretty easy assignment. He had to just be a very noble, humble, good man who was a shot and gym teacher. And also took my dad wandering around the fruit fields of California in the summer, because they didn't get paid in the summer when you were a teacher, and they didn't want to starve. So he and my dad would go sharecrop. And basically, if you've ever watched the movie Grapes of Wrath, that was the story of my dad and his dad during the Great Depression. It wasn't an easy time, and he shared a lot of those stories with me, and I guess I'm the only child that listened to them, because I am the only one that took up my dad's sort of a Depression era view of reality. I was very frugal all through my life. I was very cautious and careful about what I did. I was not a big spender. I saved a lot of money, and I generally played life safe until I had my spiritual awakening about 5 years ago, and then everything went out the window, and I just had to devote my life to the mission I'm sharing with you now, because I think it's very important. I do believe I'm an important character. I do believe that God of the tall grays, who told me, you've been given a great gift, use it wisely. That's all he communicated to me that night. And then gave me all these incredible visions of past lives and the structure of the universe. I mean, those of you who had one of those really deep spiritual experiences with ayahuasca can relate to this. And most of you were just like in awe. It's like, oh, I saw God. Oh, I saw all knowledge. I saw everything. But when a day later, they can't describe any of it except the vague feelings that they had. Well, I can describe it all. I processed it all. It was very painful, but I can actually describe in detail what was revealed to me then. And I keep getting more detail as I have these visions, like last night, that tie these things together. And how do I know this? I do. I check my work too. I don't just assume that, okay, this must be how this works. I got a degree in physics. I keep up on this stuff. I check everything that I tell you against the latest discoveries in a wide variety of sciences. So I'm not just some bozo giving you a line of hooey like a lot of the assholes were accusing me of after not liking my last podcast about atheism. I actually know a lot about this shit. And it's your choice to listen to me or not, but I tell you that we are in a very special time. This is the changeover between an old version of the plan and a new version of the plan. And this changeover is a really important one because we are finishing the Gaia experiment. Humanity is the last chosen species needed to test the version 12 of God and Karma and Lucifer, who are the three most important souls in this game. Borg 12 is an important soul too, kind of the hive mind Buddha that generates all the non-player characters, all the sidekicks, all the scenery, all the stock stuff that we enjoy experiencing as we have incarnation experiences. After this point, there will still be testing the physical universe. There will be an 8th day of creation, but that 8th day will basically be a padded cell that protects other souls from dark souls that would hurt them, that would use and abuse them. That's what happens if you go down the dark path. That's why I'm religions that don't recognize the existence of evil. If you think everything is love, we are all one, you are supporting the adversary. You are enabling narcissism. If you think being a good parent is basically letting your kid do whatever they want, oh, you can be wherever you blockers and you are being the worst kind of parents you can be. You're childish parents who care more about being loved and liked who Tifa, who's against fascists who don't even exist. Communist anarchists destroying their own communities, pretending that they're protesting some event that was supposedly, like the George Floyd thing. If you think that you're doing any good by worshiping George Floyd, who was a fentanyl addict, had a record a mile long of violent crime, who absolutely was dealt with properly by the police, who were afraid of make the police good by supporting these jackasses. Yes, there are a bunch of wonderful, wonderful black people that you could look up to and knew a lot of nationwide insurance. And there were some just absolutely wonderful black women and men working there who were extremely competent, knew their job, who deserved their job, who did it better than anybody I could imagine, and who were really nice, easy people to work with. They didn't feel entitled. They didn't go around saying, well, you got to give me this or that because I'm a diversity kid. The new generation is narcissistic. They think the world owes them something. And if they don't get it, by God, they're going to scream bloody murder till they get it. These are not good people. These are not the good guys. These are people that have been turned by the adversary. They have marked their souls as beasts. And when this event concludes, which it is going to be concluding sooner than you think, these people will die. All people die. All lives come to an end. And when they die, they are going to be going to a hellish universe that they have earned. Maybe even the worst universe, the universe of the archdemon Lilith, where they will be absolutely everything it's worth. Lilith's universe is like the movie The Matrix times 1,000,000. It's that dark and horrible. And some of these souls are going to go there. I know that the bastards that are driving this great reset depopulation agenda through the WF and their buddies in the Chinese Communist Party, they are absolutely going to the deepest pits of hell. And they are never going to get to come back as human again. Sorry. That's the worst kind of beast you could be. You're never going to get a chance here. The only reason your soul was allowed here, we needed to have both the dark and good characters in this 3 generations. Once we have accomplished it, we don't need to keep replaying that pattern. We might replay it if another. I'll close up with a little bit more of how this works. So basically, each of these major days of creation, and even some of the minor days, are like a saved game. This is a useful starting point where some major soul had a Messiah life. Might be God, might be Lucifer, might be Karma, might have been Borg. Each of those souls, even Lilith, has had her Messiah incarnations. Just not as many as the rest of us, because Lilith is still clinging to her form as an intergalactic high adversary. Creation. And there will be more days of creation as we gradually drive the adversary out of Lucifer's universe. This is Lucifer's ultimate win. This is why he signed up to be playing this physical universe game, which isn't all that fun for him. It probably would have been a lot more fun if he got to just create his own spiritual universe and make it work and act like whatever he wanted. He's paid a huge price, and it's not surprising that there are darker versions of Lucifer running around that have gotten very frustrated and maybe sometimes allied themselves on a bad day. Bad soul, but Lucifer has been incarnating just like God. They kind of, like I said, they kind of play tag team. That's the Gemini pattern. You add Karma to the mix, and that's the Trinity. And Karma doesn't, normally would be female, but doesn't necessarily have to be female. The judge doesn't have a strong tie to any sex, any particular incarnation. She's quite neutral, as judges should be. And so, most of the incarnations of Karma have been female. The most famous of which is the one I mentioned today, Daniel. Indo-European culture. There's a version in almost every Indo-European culture. There are also copycats that pretend to be Karma but are actually in of the adversary. And this is why the adversary has come to like to masquerade as a female god, a loving, oh, I'm so loving, I love everybody, love is a universal. This is the dark female god. This is no good spirit. This is not Mother Earth. This is a faker that loves you, a narcissistic faker that wants your love and promises attention, sacrifice a cute. I'll share the adrenochrome with you. Yes, this does happen. This is what Satanists are doing all over the world. Some thinking it's just a big joke, part of an initiation rite that kind of thumbs your nose at the world that's not part of the jet set, but it has real negative consequences spiritually. And these people who participate in this stuff are marking themselves for hell. This is the truth. You can choose to ignore it. You can merrily go on with your life thinking, I can do anything. There's no God. There's no karma. There's no afterlife. I'm just going to credit. maybe so much that you decide, well, I'm just going to go back to source and roll an entirely new character and lose all the experience I had. A lot of you are going to make that choice. You're going to realize when you have your life review that, man, I was such a nasty shit. I don't think I've got a position that I want to build on here. I'm going to throw in the towel. And I wouldn't blame most of you for that. That's a valid choice. You always have choices. That is what God's life is. God's real love is giving choices, giving opportunities, letting you make your own mistakes, letting you earn your own rewards. Not handing out free candy to every God is not a God of equity. That is the adversary that preaches that nonsense. Not everybody deserves the same things. Not everybody works hard enough for what they get. Not everyone makes the best of what they're given. If you happen to choose parents in an incarnation that are very wealthy, okay, well, that's going to be to some extent an advantage in your incarnation, but you are going to be expected more of in that character than if you were born in a poor family. You've got all these resources. Are you going to use them for good, or are you going to use them to amass more money and to take advantage of people? There's a lot more risk involved. To a question I answered on Quora recently. Well, gee, why wouldn't everybody just want to, incarnate as the child of rich parents? Well, for one thing, you may not get that opportunity because there are going to be a lot of souls that think, especially young and naive souls, that, oh man, that's going to be an easy life. I want to be their child. And generally find out it's not so easy to be a child of rich parents, to have everything handed to you, to have so many opportunities, so many temptations. And if you know any rich children, some of them turn out to be wonderful people, and some of them, end up on Skid Row without a penny. Sorry. This is reality. You are not owed anything by any other soul. You may earn it. They may want to give. There's no law in the multiverse that says there is going to be equity. There is going to be justice. Karma is the spirit of justice. Karma is the real Holy Ghost, the anchor of the multiverse, the central of the Trinity, which is why I think Janus only had two heads, because kind of the anchor is this hidden spirit that anchors the present, is always judging the present, and may send you to the past for past lessons in less developed cultures, less developed species, or to the future. More developed species, more galactic species, which are going to be a very different range of cultural experiences and challenges than you would have if you incarnated in the past. And you will be able to incarnate in both directions. This is something that people are reporting more and more in their near-death experiences and their past life regression experiences, either under regression hypnosis or through psychedelic plant experiences. Used to be 100 years ago or so that almost all past life experiences were actually past lives. Far distant periods of history. And here recently, again, another person I would encourage you to investigate their work is Dolores Cannon, who was basically the inventor, the codifier of the past life regression hypnosis technique, which is a very, very light level of hypnosis, not deep suggestive hypnosis. And in this light level of hypnosis, with very minimal guidance, you can recover memories of past lives. Not everybody has had them. So some people will go to a past life regression session and they don't have any past lives to draw up, so they will just make something up. They will maybe have some these young women were Cleopatra in the past life. They may have some memory of Egyptian times coded in their DNA. They may have been a minor character in Egyptian times, but very few souls get to play Cleopatra. That is a major character in that era of history. At least in some versions. Who knows? We're going to be exploring a new history. And this is part of why we keep discovering new things that cause us to change our ideas of, geez, what really happened in history? This is why we've recently discovered things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that suddenly, gosh, the books of the Bible were a little bit different than somehow integrate into our overview of the spirituality of that age. We're going to keep discovering stuff like that. And this is going to be the fun that folks who are passionate about history are going to get to explore. That's what I plan to do after this incarnation. I'm going to be exploring with groups of friends in my own little private ark, my Merkaba machine, going to different time periods and seeing what really happened with people that are interested in that era and who may want to be the god of, certain eras of history, eventually learn enough to be. This is how the game works. Others are going to basically choose to be non-player characters forever because they don't have any particular skills or higher passion or desire to keep playing the game. That's okay. That's a choice. Nobody's forcing anything on you. It's all choice-based, and choice is the ultimate gift, the ultimate love that God gives, not entitlement, choice. So anyway, with that said, I think we're ready to wrap it up. Like, share, subscribe, throw darts at me like the last bunch of fun people did on my opinions about atheism. And until next time, happy karma.